Okay, so before we go into multiband compression, I just want to say this one thing. With mixing in general, if you can do something a simple way rather than a complex way, then do it the simple way. I've learned this through bitter experience of getting too big for my boots and wanting to try all these cool techniques because I think it's going to make my mix sound better because it's complex. But with a simple mix, there are going to be fewer moving parts in your mix that can go wrong, and multiband compression and using multiband compressors are one of those tools that it does get complicated, and personally I barely ever use them. I use them sometimes in a mastering stage, but they have the potential to ruin a mix if you don't know how to use them properly. So in a nutshell, multiband compression works exactly the same as normal compressors, except you have different frequency bands in the compressor. So you have separate controls for the bass and the mid and the high frequencies, or however many bands you want to create in the multiband compressor. So if this is a complex plugin with the potential to ruin mixes, why do we use it at all? Well, it also gives us a lot of power and very intricate control on certain frequencies. So let's have a look. I'll show you how to use it, and I'll show you some examples of what you can achieve and what to look out for. Multiband compressors have a variety of uses. They can add weight and body to our low end. They can help control some harsh frequencies in vocals. They can add some sparkle to the high end. But as I said, they are immensely powerful. They're like the gun of music production. So firstly, how do they work? Well, as I said, they are just normal compressors, except they split the different frequency bands into having their own compressor. So here I have put a multiband compressor over my drum bus because multiband compression is usually used on a bus rather than on an individual sound, although it can be, and I'll show you how after this. So this is our drum and bass bus. Okay, so now we've activated the multiband compressor. Let's have a look what's going on. Now you can actually solo each of the separate bands. I've got 4 set up, but people often use 3. It's unusual to use more than 4 bands because that gets a bit intricate. But I've decided that I want to tighten up the low end of this kick and bass bus, and I want to have the bass a bit more consistent. Each of our 4 bands has their own compressor controls, exactly the same as the compressor controls we looked at in the core plugins module. So threshold, attack, release, ratio, knee. You've got a range control as well, and look ahead, and some more complex controls. But let's just stick to the basic ones for the moment. So I'm going to solo the bass frequencies. Remember, you can change the frequency ranges. I like to select my frequency ranges so each one has a distinctive role to play in the track. So I can hear that the power of the kick is coming at these ranges, whereas there it's not powerful enough. So I wait till I hear the power there, and then I can do that with each track. Sorry, I can do that with each band. Anyway, with the bass band, here we go. So let's activate the compressor, and we can see the gain reduction is already starting. So I'm going to do this quite extreme so you can hear the difference. And now we're compressing it. I'm going to see what the meter is hitting there. It's peaking at about -6 dBFS. So I want to make it so the compressed signal is peaking at about that as well, so it's a fair test. So I'm not being distracted by the change in volume. So let's activate the compressor. You can see it's compressing it quite a lot. So let's take the output gain up until we can see this meter here hitting about -6 dB. And now when we bypass, we can hear the difference. Now this isn't a very extreme compression setting, so I'm going to make it more extreme so you can really hear the difference. Now we can, that's some real gain reduction there, so let's pump it right up. So we're hitting that -6 dB on our master. Now this is just a relative measurement I'm taking. So it was -6 before we activated the multiband compressor, it's -6 after, so that's what we want. So that's bypassed. And now when we unsolo that band in the multiband compressor, now let's do a comparison. Bypassed. As I said, it's a subtle effect, but it can make a real difference for getting just more body and power to your low end. Similarly, you can do it with the high end as well, or any of the bands where you think they need a bit more volume. It kind of works in a similar way to an equalizer, except you've got compression controls as well. So let's try that with the high band as well. Just get some more energy going on. Now we've got our compression, let's bump up the volume. So we've got this staccato sound. And now unsolo it. And now let's bypass the multiband. And then activate it. As I said, very subtle, but this is what's really going on. Make it more extreme. Bypass. So that is how we can use a multiband compressor to control a bus. Works especially well with drums, but this is not a tool I use often because I make sure that the mix is good before I reach this stage. So multiband compression is not something you do early on. It's definitely something you would do after balancing the levels, doing your EQ, doing your normal compression, and so forth. And only then if you've determined you actually should be using a multiband compressor. Now, despite what I just said about multiband compression being further down in the chain if you use it at all, say for bus multiband compression, if you actually want to shape the sound of one particular instrument, then you can use it very early on in the chain. Now, this might be used in the music production stage, and it is risky because you can absolutely destroy a sound, but it can also be used in a very creative way to bring out certain frequencies. So we have our synth chords, for example. Let's listen to them in the mix. Now I've turned off all processing on them at the moment that we had before, like the saturation and the equalizer. Now I'm using the stock multiband compressor from Ableton Live here, and I've loaded up a preset called OTT, which is quite popular with EDM producers, but it is very extreme. So let's have a listen to what it does to our synth chords. So you can hear it's really making it a sausage shape, but instead of a normal compressor, because it's multiband, the preset has actually got different compression settings dialed in for each separate band, which gives us a lot more control. So you can hear that the high ends in particular and all those harmonics are brought out. But it's at the sacrifice of the dynamic range. So the stabs are now much more sustained than staccato. So if you are going to use a multiband compressor on a sound, make sure that you are not destroying the vibe of the track, and that perhaps equalization or some saturation or perhaps some parallel processing might be more appropriate. But the good thing with the Ableton Live multiband compressor is that you've got a dry wet knob, so you can actually choose how much to affect the sound, which is in effect parallel processing, but with a multiband compressor. You can hear how sustained those bass notes now are. So as I said, it's there for you to use, but use with care. Now, another use for multiband compression is on vocals for something called de-essing. Now, when vocals are recorded, quite often the sibilants will be very pronounced, so people saying s and f. Now, this is a common problem with vocals that aren't necessarily recorded so well. Now, I've switched song because the vocals on the example we've been using are actually recorded very well, so I'm going to use an example where they weren't really up to scratch when I got them. I've just looped a small section, so let's listen to it.
So it's time that we were facing the truth. So it's time that we were facing the truth.
So you can hear the S's are very pronounced and really resonant. But if we just use an equalizer to take them down.
So we were facing the truth. So it's time that we were facing the truth. So it's time that we were.
We'll actually muffle the whole vocal, and we don't want to do that because we want that bright air, but we don't want the very harsh F's and S's. And you can use a dedicated de-esser for this, and if you've actually bought the advanced version of this course, then you will have access to many more tools for how you can deal with all sorts of problems with recorded vocals. But for now, I shall give you an example of what a multiband compressor can do. So if you find the frequency with a single band where the harsh sounds are happening, so we can hear that's where the S's are happening, and then we can just apply compression to that band. We can just bring the threshold down so the compression is only triggering when these very loud S's and F's are happening.
So it's time that we were facing the truth.
So we can see the gain reduction happening.
So it's time that we were facing the truth. So it's time that we were facing the truth.
Without it.
So it's time that we were facing the truth. So it's time that we were facing the truth.
So you can hear it just takes the harsh sibilant sounds away without either compressing the whole vocal or without having to EQ all that lovely top end of it. And those are the three main ways in which we can use multiband compression when mixing. I know I've already said it a few times, but use it with care because whilst it's a very powerful tool, you can end up spoiling a mix. Now we're almost at the end of our advanced mixing techniques module. We have just one more lesson and then we've got our quick win exercise for this module. Now the next lesson we are going to look at mid-side processing. Now I know that sounds a bit complex and boring, but it's really quite simple. So I'll explain what it is, I'll explain how we do it and also why we do it. See you there.